Hi guys, welcome to my YouTube channel.
I had to put on my reaching hat. Hear me out.
He's the Montgomery County millionaire who forced a man to dig tunnels under his home.
Computer hacker Daniel Beckwitt had dug an elaborate network of tunnels underneath his Bethesda home because he believed North Korea was planning a nuclear attack.
If you don't think this is the case, you probably don't have your foil hat on tight enough. I definitely got my foil hat on tight enough, right? Probably don't have your foil hat on tight enough if you think that crypto's enough. But if your foil hat happens to be on extremely tight, you might even consider the wacky possibility that a well-resourced entity has already spent billions of dollars inserting mind-controlled chips into the world's top cryptographers.
If North Korea bombs us,
Everyone's
you don't want
gonna be
everybody
looking for
coming
us.
for your bunker.
Exactly.
I agree.
Exactly.
I understand.
This was the place where Askaya Kafra's charred and naked body was found in September 2017. The 21-year-old from Silver Spring, Maryland, would sleep in the tunnels and use a bucket to go to the bathroom.
Packed with smoke.
Oh.
Just seconds. I mean, it's literally just seconds. Packed with smoke.
Okay, and what do you do?
I'm yelling like, Kia, fire, gotta get out, whatever exactly.
Thank you for clicking. Today I want to talk about the tragically bizarre case of Daniel Beckwitt. So this case is actually quite controversial because some people think it was just a horrible accident and other people think it's something far more sinister. So as usual here on my channel, I'm going to give you guys the facts. We'll talk a little bit about the theories and then you can decide for yourself. But before I begin, you guys know I have to give my thanks to my returning subscribers, old and new. Thank you guys so much. Seriously, you guys are my happy place, my escape from reality, and I appreciate you so much. I can't even begin to explain. All right. Let's dive in. Oddly enough, and completely by coincidence, this case takes place in the same county as my last case, which is Montgomery County in Maryland. But this case takes place mostly in Bethesda. It all went down on September 10th, 2017, when Bruce LeShan was outside of his house fixing his windshield. It was a Sunday afternoon and he started to hear yelling. Somebody was screaming, "Get out, get out." Then he noticed smoke. He looked over and he realized it was coming from his next door neighbor's house. So he ran over there, went to the front door and was trying to open the door. But he couldn't because there was something blocking the door. At that moment, a man walked out and he recognized that man as his neighbor, Daniel Beckwitt. Daniel Beckwitt was shirtless and he had dirt all over his torso and he was frantic. Bruce asked him, "Daniel, are you okay?" And Daniel screamed, "He's in the basement." So Bruce found the basement door, opened it, and as soon as he opened it, he saw flames. So he had no choice but to back out. And at that moment, Daniel was screaming, "Call 911, call 911," because Daniel didn't have a cell phone, but more on that later. So Bruce called 911. And soon after, the firefighters arrived. When they arrived, they went in. They were trying to put out the flames. At the same time, they took Daniel and they put him in a stretcher and they were trying to wheel him away to give him some medical attention because he seemed to have some minor injuries. But Daniel was trying to get out of the restraints and he was screaming, "He's in there, he's in there." Neighbors had gathered around at this point and rumors started going around that somebody had died in the house, but they didn't know anything yet. It wasn't until later that evening when the coroner came and they saw a body being removed under a white sheet. But the problem was nobody knew who it was. All they knew that it was a young man and he was charred from head to toe. The medical examiner had determined that the cause of death was smoke inhalation and thermal injuries. It was at that point that the fire investigator made a strange discovery. He noticed a hole in the ground, and when he looked further into it, he noticed that it went about 20 feet deep. They went in to explore a little bit more, and they discovered a network of tunnels about 200 feet or more wide. There were bunkers, there were wires, cords, lots of debris, there was human excrement, there was saturated products. I mean, it was a mess in there. And actually, to this day, we still don't know how extensive the tunnels are because it was totally unsafe for the investigators to go in there. As a matter of fact, it was so unsafe that they weren't even able to send a robot into all the areas. So while the fire investigators were exploring the scene, Daniel was taken to the hospital and he was questioned there. He got treated for some minor injuries, and then later on he was taken to the station for more questioning. But Daniel was very evasive, especially when it came to what was on the property, who was there, what they were doing, and what everything was all about. He didn't mention anything about the tunnels. He didn't really say a lot about the person who was there, why they were there, what was going on. It was all so weird. At this point, the man was identified as Askia Kafra. And when the police asked Daniel who he was, why he was there, he started giving these weird answers that didn't make sense. He said that, oh, this was a bachelor pad, and that he was sitting on bags of concrete and he would do his work in the tunnels or in the basement. It didn't make any sense. So while the detectives were questioning him, one of the detectives, she got a text message from the fire investigator. So she left the interrogation room and she called him. And he told her what they found, and he said, ask him about the tunnels. So she went back inside and confronted him with the information, like, we found these tunnels, what's going on? And it was then that Daniel started giving little bits of information just when he absolutely had to about what was going on.
You would pick him up, and at what point would you blindfold him?
Usually somewhere around Potomac.
Okay, and what would you do? Like pull off on the side of the road?
I just hand him some glasses and he put them on.
What do you mean glasses?
They were just like blacked out glasses.
Like sunglasses, or they completely cover your eyes?
Completely covering.
So he couldn't see anything?
No. He was cool with it. I mean, I told him before he ever came, I was like, this is one of the conditions.
What did you tell me what you said?
Oh, I just said, I'm concerned about people knowing exactly where this is at. And as a result, if you want to come here, put this on for duration of the drive and walking in. And he was always cool with it,
Okay.
so that if he did decide to ever turn on me or whatever, he'd be like, oh yeah, that's down in Lake Anna or wherever.
I get it,
have no
because
idea.
If North Korea bombs us,
Everyone's
you don't want
gonna be looking
everybody
for
coming
us.
for your bunker.
Exactly.
I agree.
Exactly.
I understand. So
That was the only reason behind it.
So you would then drive back to your house, and he kept the glasses on. Okay. And then would you hold one to his arm? How would you get him in the house?
I'd usually just have the key lanyard. I'd give him one end of the key lanyard, and he'd just take a few steps, and just leave him with that.
And did you take him in through your front door?
Only the basement door.
Only the basement door. So was it unlocked, or you would unlock it?
I would unlock it.
Okay.
Why was that?
So he would hold on to your, do you have your keys with you?
No, they're still down in
So
Berkeley.
how long is the lanyard?
A foot maybe.
Oh,
Maybe a
really?
little over.
Okay, so you tell him to hold on, and you would just kind of guide him down the
Yeah,
back.
and then pull the glasses off once he's inside.
Yeah. So Daniel would get a rental car, and he would pick Askia up, and he would drive to Virginia. And then in Virginia, he would tell him that this is where the house was. Keep in mind, the house is in Bethesda, Maryland. Then he would put these blackout goggles on Askia, and then he would pretend to be driving around Virginia, but really he would loop back and go back to Bethesda. And his reasoning behind that was because he was building this shelter because North Korea was gonna bomb us. And so he felt like when that day came, Askia, if he knew where the shelter was, he would tell other people, and then everybody would want to come seek shelter in Daniel's home. Once the media got a whiff of this, they had a field day. Okay, you've got a Bitcoin millionaire, and then you've got these weird tunnels and the North Korea bunkers, and then you have a person who died in there and the conditions of the tunnel. So it became this huge story. And remember Bruce, the neighbor who heard the yelling and came? Well, turns out that Bruce is a reporter for the local news station.
Now, all of this happened literally just above my own backyard. I was the first person on the scene. I tried to get into the burning house to rescue Kafra, but it was just too dangerous. Bruce Leshan, WUSA 9.
Remember that day and Bruce's efforts there.
And now this is when the story begins to unravel. And you know that saying that says truth is stranger than fiction? Okay, that really applies to this case. So to understand how we get to this point, you need to go back to Daniel's childhood, because he had a very eccentric childhood. First of all, his family stood out as the eccentrics in a suburban neighborhood. His father was a singer and like an opera singer, and he even performed at the White House. And his mother, Linda, she was a lawyer, and then she was like disillusioned by the whole thing, and then she decided to become a singer as well. But Linda had some issues. Okay, first of all, she was a major hoarder. And second of all, she was that lady in the neighborhood that would yell at the neighbor kids if they got too close to her property line. And then she had this gold Honda Odyssey minivan that she would like obsessively guard and get so angry if anybody got near it. They rarely had visitors in the house, but there was one neighbor who did go in there, and she described it as a hoarder house. There's just piles and piles of stuff everywhere. And see, Linda was extremely protective of her only child, her son, Daniel. She also thought that he was a genius because he was talking as a toddler and he was hitting all these landmarks.
I meant to say milestones.
Super early, and she believed that the school system in the area would stifle his intellect and mess with it. So she decided to homeschool him from kindergarten all the way to 12th grade. Daniel was extremely sheltered and isolated. He never went outside. He never played with the neighbor kids. And then when he did leave the house, he always had both of his parents with him. He even was trick-or-treating as a teenager with both parents with him. They would all wear like costumes together as like a family unit. He basically was never alone until he graduated. And then he got accepted into the University of Illinois' elite engineering school. And that's when he had his first, moment of freedom. So he was studying electrical engineering and computer science. And although he was really, really good at his classwork, he was really, really bad at making friends for obvious reasons, right? He was not socialized as a kid at all. So he ended up finding his community online. And more specifically on 4chan. 4chan, if you don't know, it's like Reddit, but the difference is you don't have to create usernames and you don't have to create an account. And so there's really no accountability and there's a lot of anonymity. And on top of that, like the posts expire after a while. It was invented by a 15-year-old kid, by the way. And so it was very much, most of the people on 4chan, there's a lot of topics just like Reddit, but most of the people on there are like very into tech. So Daniel found his community on 4chan and he posted on 4chan a lot. He was on there almost all the time. And he opened up a lot to the community on 4chan. He talked about his childhood. He talked about how he was very gifted and how he had all these accomplishments at the age of 15 with AP classes and things like that. And he had a fascination with blowing things up. He did a post where he said, quote, that he used his AP chemistry knowledge to blow shit up in my backyard. He also had an overwhelming fear of death. And he talked about it a lot on 4chan. He even talked about wanting to get a head transplant and how he was watching videos of beheadings and stuff online, like gruesome graphic things. But Daniel was not prepared for what happened next. One night after Thanksgiving, the ambulance was called to his parents' house and they took his mother away. His mother was extremely jaundiced and emaciated. And come to find out, she had a lump on her breast that she had chosen to essentially ignore and not go to the doctor. So by the time the ambulance was called, her situation was really, really bad. And she ended up dying 2 weeks later in the hospital. And Daniel was shell-shocked, okay? He had a very hard time with it. When he went to his mother's funeral, people said he looked dazed and confused and he was disheveled. His shirt was sloppy, they said, and his pants were the wrong size. One of the attendees said that only 3 people were at the funeral. Quote, "It was the saddest occasion I've ever experienced." They said that Daniel gave the eulogy and he said, "I'm only 19. How am I supposed to deal with this?" And now his father had Parkinson's at the time of his mother's death. And when she died, his Parkinson's went into severe decline to the point where he had to be put into an assisted living facility. So essentially, at the age of 19, Daniel was somewhat orphaned. So Daniel went back to school and soon after he got in trouble with the law. Why? Because in 2012, Daniel vandalized and hacked his college. He sealed the doors and all the keys with this weird like gooey glue thing. And then he hacked into the professor's emails and he sent these long, obscene emails to the students from the professor's emails. And for example, one of the emails said that the glue that he had put prevented me from going about my daily routine of masturbating to bondage porn in my office while eating cupcakes made of monkey excrement. So police were investigating, trying to figure it out. And by early 2013, they had gotten a search warrant for Daniel's dorm room. And when they entered, they found tons of incriminating evidence as well as abhorrent living conditions. The hoarding conditions that he had grew up in, well, yeah, he seemed to carry on those habits, I guess, and his dorm was described as riddled with trash, electrical wires, partially eaten food, computer equipment, and dirty clothes, an officer wrote in his report. They said that there was a bare mattress on the floor surrounded by lockpicks, a Ruger 22 rifle, and the hood of a fire protection suit. They also found documents that connected him to the hacking. So they arrested him and they charged him with multiple felonies. So keep in mind that Daniel had gotten a $2.6 million trust from his mother when she passed. So he had a lot of money and he used that money to hire a top shelf attorney who ended up getting him a plea deal. And basically he had to pay a fine. I think it was $23,000 in restitution, and he had probation, but he didn't have to actually serve any time. So he went on Reddit, not 4chan, he went on Reddit this time, and he said, I would have been effed going to trial. There were literally reams of evidence. But he didn't think that the record would haunt him because, listen to this, quote, I'm expecting a gubernatorial pardon within a few years. The fact that I have enough money to make the maximum campaign contribution to said governor also helps a lot. He didn't end up getting pardoned, but he got probation, so he got off somewhat. And it is around this time that Daniel's paranoia goes into overdrive. He felt like he needed to take a, quote, more defensive position against, death. He did some research and he found that for his age group, the leading cause of death was car accidents. So he took his mother's minivan, remember the golden Honda Odyssey, and he reinforced it with Kevlar plates and started driving it with a bulletproof vest on at all times in case there was an impact. And then he was also afraid of getting skin cancer, so he got every single mole on his body that was more than 2 millimeters removed. He then had made this concoction of this stimulant called Primiracetam and caffeine, and he had this like his own energy drink that he created, and he would consume that. He also talked about considering creating his own hyperbaric chamber, again, to extend his life. But what Daniel feared most of all was nuclear attack, specifically from North Korea. He was always following the news, and he was convinced that a nuclear attack from North Korea was imminent and that he had to build a fallout shelter or some kind of bunker underground. That is why he started digging those tunnels. He wrote on 4chan, one simply needs something along the lines of a greenhouse with good air filtration to grow plants and a fallout shelter. Using the money from his trust, he began to get all the materials and equipment to start building the shelter. He hired a few people along the way after trying on his own, and the last person he hired was Askia. The thing about Daniel is, he was studying engineering, and so he felt like he had enough knowledge in structural engineering to do this project safely on his own. By 2015, he was off probation and he went full on this project of building his shelter. And this is around the time he meets Askia. You see, Daniel was broadcasting himself on a video chat platform called Blab. And he would do so anonymously, wearing the fire retardant suit. And he used the alias 3-Alarm Lamp Scooter, which is a reference to a character in a science fiction novel. So in these chats, he proclaimed himself to be a prophetic investor and a Bitcoin millionaire. So this is a random side note, but I thought it's worth mentioning. During these video chats on Blab, it is said that Daniel, aka 3-Alarm, actually video chatted with Martin Shkreli. I'm probably saying it wrong, Shkreli. Remember that pharma guy who bought this pharmaceutical company and it had an AIDS medication, and he hiked the price up like 5,000% to some crazy, like life-saving medication, and he hiked it up. Remember him? Well, apparently they were supposedly friends, so I don't know, I just thought that was worth mentioning. But anyway, while Daniel was on Blab, Askia was on there watching, and he was so impressed with this Bitcoin millionaire and prophetic investor because Askia was into that. He wanted to be one of these Silicon Valley millionaires. Askia came from a middle-class home. His parents were immigrants from Trinidad. His mom was a 5th grade teacher and his dad was an inventor. So Askia's friends said that he had big dreams early on. First off, he had went to junior ROTC and it seemed like he was gonna go the military route, but then he got this $100,000 settlement for like lead poisoning, and that's when he had his first taste of like the good life. And friends say that he would rent like fancy cars to take his girlfriend out to like fancy dinners, and he got infatuated with this lifestyle. So once the cash dried up in a few years because of the way he was spending it, he was like, it's fine because I'm developing an app. And he was developing an app with his business partner called Equity Shark. And by all accounts, it was a pretty promising app. The idea was it was a crowdsourced platform where basically anybody could donate small amounts of money to promising startups. So Askia and his business partner actually had applied to it's a $100,000 fellowship by Peter Thiel. I don't know if you're familiar with him. He's like one of those billionaire tech giants from Silicon Valley. And so there was a fellowship, they had applied, they had even gotten a call back, and they were invited to come to California and basically pitch their ideas. So back to Daniel, aka 3 Alarm, on Blab. When Askia saw Daniel on Blab, he recognized him and was impressed with him because Daniel also had spoken at a convention, like these hacker type of conventions, and there was a lot of fire involved in his speech. So take a look.
3 Alarm, and he's going to go ahead with his presentation.
Okay, so why are you all intently staring at some weird dude in a fire proximity suit about to deliver a talk entitled, "This message will self-destruct in 10 seconds, avoiding bilateral nucleation"? Well, the short answer is Vishnu works in mysterious ways. The long answer to this question is a little complex and indirectly stretches back several years. However, more immediately, the prospect of me speaking here was first broached at the October DC 2600 meeting. Well, some of you may remember, Bruce had a very entertaining presentation with Deviant Olam and Shane Lawson at DEF CON 19 entitled, "And That's How I Lost an Eye, Exploring Emergency Data Destruction," where they went over various misadventurous methods for rapidly disposing of data on hard drives in the hypothetical event of rapid invasion of a data center by a hostile actor. Could be a 3-letter agency, right? All right. It's a laugh line, people. There we go. Come on, it's ShmooCon. Live it up. All right, that's a little better. People are seeming dead here. Anyways, so I've got a video demonstration. You can see that poor little flash drive getting ready to get cremated. We just dump the thermate on top of the flash drive, stick a little sparkler in the top, and then I have another video where I can show you this in action. Here we go. It's like a birthday cake. So our sparkler's going. Give it a second here. Just has to burn down. And now we're about to go. Good little flash there. Although if you'll notice, there's really not much slag getting ejected by comparison. It's just a lot of hot gases, ionized to the point of glowing. Now we're just smoking again. Yeah, there we go. wait until you see what happened. So now we're back to the presentation, and barbecued flash, anyone? I mean, there's literally nothing remotely resembling a flash drive there.
So on Blab, Daniel had this persona as 3 Alarm, and he had put on this accent. They called it Trailer Park Ebonics. He would end his sentences with yeah, and he would constantly refer to all his digging, and he affectionately would call all his viewers boo-boo, boo-boo, like what's up boo-boo, da-da-da. So one day on Blab, Askia was watching, Daniel was talking, and he mentioned how he was open to new investments. He wanted to invest in things. So immediately Askia was like, he mentioned it to Daniel, and Daniel said, pitch me, boo-boo. And so Askia did. They decided to meet. Askia and his business partner and Daniel were going to meet in Rockville at a hookah bar. So keep in mind that at this point, Askia and his business partner do not know what Daniel looks like because he's always in that fire retardant suit on Blab, right? So when he walks in, he was wearing a hat and like goggles, and they could see that he had quite a baby face, and they were shocked at how young he was. He was their age. For some reason, they thought that he was older than he was. And then when Daniel sat down, Askia noticed that there was something bulging all around him. And so he asked him, like, what's going on? He said, quote, dude, you're wearing a bulletproof vest? And then Daniel said, gotta stay safe on these streets. And they all laughed. It seems like they hit it off. They told him about their app and about how they had this fellowship lined up that they could possibly get this money. Daniel was impressed. And so they had more meetings, and eventually they signed a contract. After the contract was signed, Daniel gave them $5,000 in cash. And he told them that, you know, if they were to get this fellowship, that, you know, they could pay him back from the fellowship money. But if the fellowship fell through and they didn't get it, they would be on the hook to pay him back some other way. And they all agreed. So the day came that Askia and his business partner were supposed to go to California to have a meeting about this fellowship. And it was a comedy of errors, a disaster. First, they booked a flight to LAX airport, which is in Southern California, when they were supposed to meet in San Francisco, which is a 400-mile drive. So they were already behind as soon as they landed. Then they wanted to rent a car. They were too young, so they had to get a U-Haul. They had to drive this U-Haul all the way through the hills in San Francisco. Furthermore, they punched in the wrong address. And so they were totally late. They were like driving the opposite way until they realized they got there. They were late. The manager was like, no, we can't have the meeting anymore. You're going to have to call in and do a phone interview next week. So very, very bad first impression. So when they got back to Maryland, Askia was panicked because they made a horrible impression. They basically botched the whole thing. And he felt like now when he does that phone interview, he has to have the app way more developed than what it was because they need to make up for this huge mistake they made. So he contacted Daniel, explained the situation to him, and asked for more money so that they could get this fellowship. And Daniel didn't respond for weeks. And then, out of total desperation, Askia sends Daniel a message essentially offering himself up as like almost like indentured servitude. Let me read you the message. He says, I know that this will be successful. There's no doubt in my head. I'd even take this investment as debt because that's how much I believe in this. Even though obviously I don't currently have the money to be able to pay you back, I'd literally work for a minimum wage job for years if I had to, or just finish school and get a boring ass job somewhere, or just work it off at the compound. So a few weeks after this message, Daniel responded. He told Askia about the bunker he was building and how he needed help with the bunker, and he offered Askia $150 a day to dig the tunnels. But I just want to make that distinction because I think that when you offer up working in exchange for something is very different than someone they made it sound like he was like captured and forced to dig these tunnels. So I just want to make that distinction. So as we know, Daniel was super secretive about, the location and stuff. So he explained in the messages to Askia that, you're going to have to be blindfolded and nobody can know where this is. And Askia was fine with that. What he was actually more concerned with was the rural setting. And he said, quote, this isn't clan territory or anything, right? And then Daniel said, well, I mean, they won't be on patrol or anything. Askia asked, Will I have Wi-Fi? Because I got to do Equity Shark work too, Daniel said. Should be Wi-Fi and Ethernet. Askia responded, I trust you, which is so depressing considering what happened. But anyway, so Askia agreed to do all this digging and stuff, even though he had no experience with excavation or anything like that. So they were all amateurs doing this thing in secret. Once Askia was down in the tunnels, he was able to remove the goggles and he saw the situation. His living quarters were basically a mattress on cinder blocks. He had like a small fridge, microwave, and a Home Depot bucket to use as a toilet. Due to the way the conditions were set up, Askia felt like it was probably best for him to sleep with the hard hat on, and so that's what he did. And so the next morning, Askia began digging. The way that this was set up was that Askia would dig and he would put the dirt into a bucket. When the bucket was full, he would put it like on a pulley and he would put it up, and Daniel would take it, dispose of it, and bring it down. It was grueling labor, but the worst of it was just how dependent Askia was on Daniel for everything, because he didn't know where he was. He couldn't get out of the tunnel. He wasn't allowed to go anywhere past the basement, right? And so if he needed food, he would have to send a message and say that he was hungry, and then Daniel would throw some food down there. If he needed the bathroom, he would defecate and urinate in that Home Depot bucket, and then he would send a message, put it up in the pulley, and then Daniel would take the bucket, empty it in his bathroom, and lower it. Daniel spent most of the time upstairs in his room on his computer on 4chan. And he didn't have a cell phone because he believed that they were too easily hacked. And so all their communications were through Google Chat. But Askia had a cell phone. So even though Askia had a cell phone, he couldn't tell where he was because Daniel had spoofed the internet or something to make it look like they were in Virginia when they weren't. Since Askia had a cell phone and he did have access to internet, although it was spotty, he would post pictures of himself on social media, digging, wearing the hard hat and things like that. Askia worked and stayed in the tunnel for days at a time. So he would come for like a certain stretch of time. He would spend all of that time in the tunnels, digging and, living like that. Then he would leave and then, for a stretch of time, and then he would come back for another chunk of time. And that's how it was. And the setup was so rickety and jimmy rigged that the circuits would overload, power would go out, and the lights would go out, would be completely pitch black, or the internet would go out. And when things like that would happen, Askia would have to crawl into a narrow thing up to the wall near the basement door and just bang, 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 bang until Daniel heard him. And that's how, he would turn the power back on or give him food, water, whatever he needed. So then in April of 2017, so this is a few months before the fire, Daniel tasks Askia with a different job, to dig out the chamber. So although this had enough room for Askia to stand upright because he couldn't do that in the tunnels, it was also extremely claustrophobic because in order to get to the area where he had to dig, he had to put his body in such a strange way. And he even texted his ex-girlfriend about it. He said, quote, "Such a long slither, and then I start to feel uneasy after 20 minutes. I can only crawl out backward and my hands have to be over my head and pointed straight like I'm doing a breaststroke." He couldn't pull his arms back to his sides until he'd emerged in the chamber. "I almost freaked out," he said. "This is so claustrophobic." So his ex-girlfriend Bailey said, "Don't keep doing it if it makes you uncomfortable." Askia had come up with a solution. He noticed that there was a pile of wood covering one of the holes to the tunnel. And so he asked Daniel if they could remove that so that they could get a little bit more airflow and that could help with the claustrophobia. But Daniel refused. He said, quote, "I kind of don't want to go through the trouble of moving the wood." So Askia then vented to Bailey and he says, "Oh my OMG, so he convinced me to try again." She responds, "He shouldn't be pushing you to do it." And then Askia says, "You make me sound so fragile. I just feel like I need an exit strategy in case there's an earthquake or something. There's no getting out fast enough the long way." Nevertheless, Askia kept digging. And his parents knew kind of sort of what he was doing, that he had this like secret project with a millionaire, and they would see him come home like caked in dirt, and he would run straight to the shower. Keep in mind, around this time Askia is 21. I don't know if I forgot to mention that he's 21. Askia's parents were kind of supportive in the beginning because they thought this was an opportunity, a stepping stone, but then they started to become concerned when he told them about the conditions, but also when his behavior changed and he started to become kind of like paranoid like Daniel. He started monitoring the North Korea missiles situation. He started buying armored vests. He became really interested in the weird science that Daniel was into, particularly that experiment where scientists had created a human-pig hybrid, and he was talking differently and acting differently, and it seemed like Daniel was rubbing off on him, and his mother was worried. She kept begging him to quit. And at first he said no, but as time went on, he started telling her, you know what, I'm starting to find other investors. I'm trying to figure this out. And he was slowly going to back away from this job and try to focus more on his app, Equity Shark. Keep in mind, right, he still had that phone conversation with the fellowship, the Peter Thiel $100,000 fellowship, and that was still in the works. They were waiting to hear back. So he was holding out hope that that would kind of like fix everything. But unfortunately, he heard back that they didn't get the fellowship and they were denied. And that's when he really panicked, because he was counting on that money. He was still in debt. He had asked for more money. He was basically freaking out. So he started messaging Daniel again, basically asking for work, because this happened during a lull when he wasn't working for Daniel. He was practically begging Daniel to get back to work. He said, quote, "Dude, can I please work soon?" Daniel ignored him again for like a few weeks. Askia sent another message asking again, and then that's when Daniel responded. This is what he said. "Got some minor flooding and moderate insect issues to take care of. How many days were you thinking this week?" Askia says, "I can do a good 2 weeks, as long as he could go home for a night once or twice between then." Daniel agreed, and Askia started digging again. And that's when everything went up in flames, literally. It was the evening of September 9th. And actually, Askia was really, really happy because he had just secured a really good developer for the app. And on top of that, he had a meeting lined up with a potential investor. I can't even talk. Around 6 o'clock, September 9th, Daniel throws a bag of chips down the hole to Askia for him to eat, obviously, and then he went back up to his room where he stayed on the computer on 4chan until 1:40 a.m. At 1:40 a.m., he went to sleep. Less than an hour later, he gets some frantic text messages from Askia. At 2:32 a.m., Askia says, "Holy shit, bro, there's no power down here." At 2:37 a.m., "and smoke in the basement." Askia said that the bunker was pitch black and there was no airflow. He tried calling Daniel, but there was no answer because Daniel was asleep. 6 hours later, Daniel wakes up, and this is what he says. "Pretty major electrical failure. Just switched it all over to a different circuit." Askia responds, "Still nothing down here. It's a whole nother level of darkness." So Daniel made another adjustment. The power came back. And then Daniel heard a beeping noise. The carbon monoxide detector had lost power. But instead of doing anything in that moment, Daniel stayed on the computer for another 20 minutes. Then after that, he decided to go and like flip a switch on the circuit breaker. And as soon as he did that, he says he heard a buzzing sound. So he went to investigate what the sound was, and that's when he smelled smoke and he could see it coming like up from the kitchen floor. So he ran, So after he saw the smoke, he ran to the tunnel and he started screaming, "Askia, there's a fire, you gotta get out." And Askia responded and said, "Yo, dude." And those were his last words. So Daniel says that the smoke was overwhelming, so he escaped. He went outside and he started screaming, "Get out, get out." Remember, these were the yells that the neighbor, remember Bruce, the reporter who heard the "get out" and came over and called 911? Okay, so now we're back to that scene. So at this point, Daniel is freaking out. He goes to one of the areas where he knows the tunnel is, and he starts like clawing at the dirt, trying to find an opening. Neighbors are gathering. He's screaming for people to call 911. But it was too late. Askia was already dead. So what I'm about to describe is quite graphic. So I'm just going to warn you, because this is the condition that his body was found in. His muscles were burned and tightened, his jaw stretched open and his tongue pushed out. His face was frozen in a silent scream. His fists were clenched, his arms had retracted and curled in on themselves obscenely, like those of a praying mantis. That's a quote I'm reading. It took fire investigators more than 2 weeks to clear the area because of the amount of junk and mess and stuff that was everywhere, in the tunnels, in the basement, in the house, everywhere. One of the investigators told media, quote, "Every time you pick something up, you'd find a $5 bill or a $20 bill. Buckets soon overflowed with more than $10,000 in cash and traveler's checks." At this point, homicide detectives were called to the scene, and they say that Daniel's reaction raised red flags. It was extremely odd because he seemed to be more concerned, or grateful, shall I say, with the fact that the fire did not burn his mother's room than he was with the fact that Askia was dead. He said, quote, "It could have been worse." What? The homicide detectives were stunned because they said that he seemed to show a blatant disregard for Askia's life, which was weird because it seems like he tried to help him and he was clawing, he was trying to save him. So it's like, what's going on? It doesn't make any sense. Detectives say they had a nagging question that they couldn't understand, which was why hadn't Askia been able to escape? Because Askia and Daniel were only 2 feet apart. So how is it that Daniel was able to get out and Askia wasn't? Once they do the investigation and they find the tunnels and they have the interrogation that I told you about, prosecutors decide to charge Daniel with involuntary manslaughter and also second-degree murder, depraved heart murder, okay? Which means that there was such a blatant disregard for somebody's life that it amounted to murder, essentially.
This is a young man who was blindfolded, led into these tunnels, told he was in Virginia, and then led into that hellhole to urinate and defecate in buckets, and could only leave with the assistance of the defendant in this case. This young man was left largely helpless in a home which was just covered with debris. He was literally left in a pit below the ground in these tunnels. And when he had tried to make his way out, when a fire broke out in those tunnels, he died a horrific death.
So Daniel did not testify at his trial. And during the trial, the prosecutors had tons of pictures of the conditions of the house and the tunnels and just all the hoarding stuff that was everywhere. And for the jury, that seemed to explain everything, because there was literally just one tiny narrow path for Askia to escape from, and it was so many obstructions along the way. Although they weren't able to determine exactly what caused the fire, the prosecution and the fire investigators had developed a theory of what they think happened. Basically, what they think happened is that due to all the clutter, that slowed Askia down from being able to exit, and so he was inhaling the carbon monoxide, which caused him to be disoriented and unconscious, and that he basically, passed out and then was consumed by the flames. But then again, that doesn't really explain the expression on his face. Like maybe he wasn't fully unconscious if he was screaming in pain. I'm really not sure how the body reacts in that situation. I hope I never know what that's like. But that is the theory that they had come up with. So the jury deliberated and they came back with a guilty verdict. And when the foreman read out the verdict, Daniel's reaction, he was so shocked. They say that he gasped and then he collapsed on the table. So he was facing a maximum of 30 years. The judge sentenced him to 21 years with 9 suspended, But what that actually ended up turning to be was that he actually had to serve 9 years with 5 years probation. But if he does like the good behavior programs or something, they say that could be even reduced down to like 6 years with probation. And this is what the judge had to say. She said, "It is my opinion that you have what we call intellectual arrogance. You thought that everything would be fine because you were really smart, and you didn't perceive what most of us would consider to be really dangerous." Now, this is the crazy part where I legitimately, when I read it, I got goosebumps, okay? Listen to what Askia's mother says happened the night Askia died, okay? I'm gonna read you a quote. First, she says that she usually sings hymns, like Baptist hymns, every Sunday, and she usually sings them like in the evenings until 12, like midnight, and that's when she stops. But this is what happened the night Askia died. Quote, "I usually cut it off by 12. That Sunday, the 10th of September, was the first Sunday I did not cut the dirges off, and I was singing those dirges all day, all evening, all day, until 6 or 7, and I was so emotional, and I felt all this pain in my stomach, I did not even know what had happened." Oh, I'm getting them again. Just like, that's so crazy. Like, it's like, you know, a mother's intuition, like so weird, so weird. Anyway, so that is the case. That is the story. I'm curious to know, what do you guys think? Do you think that the sentence was correct? Like, do you think that Daniel should have been charged with the depraved heart? Because when I went to find the footage of him at the convention with the fire retardant suit, the person who posted it was his friend, and they had a post, which I'll show you, and they basically talk about how, you know, that's their friend, and the comments were split. People were like, you know, this is ridiculous. Why did they give him, you know, depraved heart murder? You know, even manslaughter is too much, like it was a total accident and he didn't mean for this to happen. And then other people were like, are you kidding me? How arrogant of him to think that he knew everything enough to create these conditions. And you know, there were plenty of times where he could have fixed the situation. For example, you know, when it was hours and he had fallen asleep for 6 hours and then he woke up, all he did was flip a switch. You know, he should have went there and maybe let the guy out or something like that. Then people were also complaining about, you know, the fact that he didn't want to remove the wood. And there's a lot of people who think that, you know, what he did was selfish and callous. And there were people who think that this is a total accident and that Askia knew what he was getting himself into and it was just a horrible, horrible accident. So I would love to know, what do you guys think? Me personally, I think it's a bit of both. Okay, I think that Askia clearly was desperate. He was in a tough situation financially and he's willing to do what it took. And clearly, you know, even when his girlfriend or his mom were worried, he's like, I'm not fragile, I can handle it. He wanted to like tough it out. But also, I think that the conditions that Daniel had were really, really risky and dangerous. And, you know, having the engineering background and stuff, clearly he knew, but he didn't know enough. So it's just a recipe for disaster. It's extremely tragic, very bizarre. And, you know, that's what I think. So thank you guys so much for watching. Please subscribe if you haven't already, and I will see you guys in the next one. Bye.